Hello, I'm Richard Fairburn. I run HSC Professional, offering consultancy services to providers and managers of residential and nursing homes and home care agencies. In normal times, this would include representations in response to draft inspection reports and proposed enforcement, requests for review of ratings, compliance assessments, and support and advice for provider information returns, seminars on regulation and inspection across the country, and regular updates on developments in inspections, national guidance, and the industry in general. I also write the occasional article on the same sort of stuff. For many years, I was the back page of This Caring Business under the wing of the late and much missed Viv Shepherd. In this short video, I'm looking at the restrictions on movement brought in for the coronavirus pandemic. The headlines are familiar to us all: stay at home, essential travel only. So what is allowed and what isn't? There certainly was some over-exuberance early on, but the police have a very difficult job to strike a fair balance. There are powers to issue fixed penalty notices and even to arrest and prosecute people under the heading of public order offences in relation to the restrictions. And it looks very much as if the rules are only going to become more complicated over the coming weeks and months rather than being relaxed altogether. So here we've got the regulation covering restrictions on movement, and I paraphrased it to make it a little bit easier to read. It's a fairly typical regulation. There's a basic requirement, and that's qualified by further detail, in this case, a list of things that you're permitted to do. So what have we got? During the emergency period, no person may leave the place where they are living without reasonable excuse. Absolute requirement, you must comply with it. The term reasonable excuse sounds a bit like what can you get away with? But think of it as a good reason for going out of your house rather than an excuse for committing an offence. If there is a good reason, then no offence is committed. So what are the good reasons? Going shopping for essentials, including food and medicines, providing care, so your travel as a care worker is obviously covered, travel to work where it's not possible from home, and a range of other provisions. Now, the interesting word here is includes. What the regulation doesn't say is a reasonable excuse is limited to one of the following, or must be one of the following. We've got an indicative list rather than a prescriptive one. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that this means that we can all take liberties and go out whenever we want. Street parties, group sunbathing in parks, obviously not permitted. But it does allow for variations on the reasonable excuse that are likewise necessary, but don't exactly match the ones in the list. And that's inevitable in any regulation of this sort. A comprehensive list of reasonable excuses for 60 million people would be impossible, even though it makes the job of the police in interpreting the rules a bit more difficult. Where does it say you can go out and post a letter? Where does it say you can drive down the road to fill up with petrol and check the tyres? Obviously, these would be reasonable excuses. But what if you're not sure whether what you need to do or want to do is within the rules? First and foremost, it's a risk assessment. The risk to you, the risk to anyone else. And it's important to appreciate that in our law, the test of what is reasonable is an objective test. It's not about whether you or I think that it's only a small risk or whether you or I are prepared to take the risk anyway. It's whether a reasonable-minded, independent person would view it as a risk. If it is likely to be in breach of the regulation. The purpose of the regulations is to prevent the spread of the virus. If you're not incurring any risk, then you're more likely to be okay. An additional option is to call the Police 101 helpline, advice line, to check if what you need to do is within the rules. And that is precisely what I did. I was in the middle of moving house. Final removals booked for 27th of March, the day after the regulations came in. The move was, of course, cancelled, so I now have the dubious pleasure of living in two houses. Travel between them is needed for my work, as I have half my stuff in each of them. I'm not putting myself or anyone else at risk. So I called Police 101, and the officer was satisfied that this was not in breach of the rules. If you make a call like this, they won't give you an inquiry number or send you confirmation. It's not an incident, but calls are recorded. Best thing to do is to ask for the police officer's collar number for your records. Make a note of the date and time and the conversation. So, in summary, come to the next slide. There is, until a government minister says otherwise in a change to the regulations, there's a clear rule against leaving your house without a good reason, a reasonable excuse. There's an indicative list, a guide to the sort of reasons that are permitted, but there's some degree of flexibility around those reasons. That does not mean that you can take liberties and go out whenever you want. The obvious proviso is that leaving your house must not put yourself or others at risk. Objective test. In other words, leaving your house must not defeat the purpose of the restrictions. And that's it for this video. Look out for more of these, and they'll mostly be closer to the regulations and guidance in social care, including the guidance on COVID-19, to the extent that I can clarify any of it from where I am. Meanwhile, to my colleagues and friends in adult social care, please stay as safe as you can. I know that's easy for me to say. I'm not on the front line, but what else can I say?